Good evening or good morning. I'm not sure which it is. We're right at that dividing line. Thank you all for being here, and I want to thank the legislators that have joined us even at this very late hour. As you all know, we began our work on February the 14th with the first special session, and many thought it was an insurmountable challenge. We inherited a $1 billion deficit for the current fiscal year and more than $2 billion for the fiscal year that begins on July 1st, the largest in the state's history. The TOPS program, K-12 education, higher education, life-saving health care services, and many other areas of state government were threatened with catastrophic cuts if we didn't take swift, decisive action. I offered a specific plan to address the problems left over from the previous administration. This plan would have fully funded our critical priorities and started us coming out of this hole that we had been left in. Today, some of us can look back on these two special sessions and the intervening regular session, knowing that we did everything that we possibly could, everything within our power to work in good faith, to compromise, to find common ground and avoid catastrophic cuts. And to a very large degree, we were successful. And that's because a clear majority of the legislators worked with us in that same fashion. But certainly not everyone in the legislature can say that. There is a relatively small group, mostly in the House, who did everything in their power to block just about every attempt that we made to find common ground and to raise the revenue necessary to fund critically important priorities. And I can't explain their motives. I won't try. Doesn't really matter. But I hope the people of Louisiana recognize that there are a few folks in the legislature more interested in continuing the policies of the past administration and playing games we often see in Washington, perhaps to hurt me politically, but certainly not in the interest of moving Louisiana forward. Now, I've offered numerous ways to fix the budget crisis over the past several months, and there were some folks who just simply wouldn't offer a single avenue of their own. They refused revenue and refused to be associated with cuts. So they, by definition, were certainly part of the problem. So I challenged them time and again to offer their own plans to address the historic problem. But they simply offered a one-word answer, and that was no. But at the end of the day, I have to tell you that I am very proud of the vast majority of legislators who have done truly an amazing job of working with me, because we have been able to a very large degree to stabilize our budget and avoid catastrophic cuts. This is where we stand. In the first special session, I cut spending in the current fiscal year by more than $230 million and implemented efficiencies across state government. For the next fiscal year, we brought a $2 billion deficit down to about $300 million, and yes, that will be made up in cuts. And in the process of expanding the Medicaid for the state of Louisiana, we will save $180 million of state general fund for next year. And yes, to meet that difference, we raised about $1.5 billion in revenue. Now, sadly, despite the fact that much of our problem is structural in nature, and it goes as far as the eye can see in terms of our structural budget deficit, the revenue that we raised, especially there in the first special session, was temporary in nature. It was short-term. And clearly the credit rating agencies didn't appreciate that particular approach. But all of that said, in just over 4 months, through relentless focus on honest budgeting, together we have corrected more than $2 billion in deficits left to us largely by the dishonest and irresponsible budgeting practices of the previous administration. And the budget that I proposed and the budget that we have, there's no one-time money. There are no fund sweeps. We did not raid the Transportation Trust Fund. And until tonight, there was no contingent funding. We didn't resort to that old trick with above-the-line funding and below-the-line funding until tonight. And the reason the contingent funding is such a problem is because it directs all revenue in excess of what's going to be recognized by REC after we sign these bills into law to go to one of three areas. The problem with that is we've been put on notice by the state's economists that we face a shortfall in the current fiscal year, and it's probably going to be $200 million or more that gets carried into next fiscal year and has to be paid up front. And so the legislature to tell me that I have to pay all of that extra revenue to higher education, to TOPS, or to health care, it interferes with my constitutional obligation to pay that debt. Secondly, we have a cash flow problem, something that I know the legislature was aware of because I put them on notice in my talk to the legislature on the first day. And there is every possibility that we're going to have to take out a loan to pay regular, ordinary bills of the state of Louisiana to deal with that cash flow problem. If all of the extra revenue has to go to those three areas, who's going to loan us the money? Absolutely irresponsible. Further than that, we are in hurricane season, and we all know what that can look like. Even when we, on the back end of a disaster, get the federal government to put up money, it is only 75%, and they repay us. We have to front all of the money. That's why you don't do contingent budgeting. That's why it is irresponsible. And the implication of front-loading TOPS so that we fully fund the first semester, but leave kids with as much as $2,500 towards their tuition in the second semester is really problematic, especially because normal avenues for student financial assistance are not available at that time of year. So again, not the best policy, not responsible. But because of the good work that we did do, the responsible work, the honest budgeting, the hard work of so many legislators and so many people in this administration to whom I am very much indebted, and the state of Louisiana is very much indebted, students in higher education are going to see the smallest increases in tuition in a decade. And cuts that would have been crippling to our institutions will no longer take effect. We can say tonight that there will not be a state general fund cut to higher education institutions across the state of Louisiana for the first time in almost a decade. I said we had to stabilize the state of Louisiana. I use first and foremost the area of higher education because, sadly, we have led the nation in state general fund reductions to higher education over the last several years. Well, that ended this year. We're not going to do that. Thanks to the hard work, the courageous work of a lot of legislators who joined with this administration to make that possible. Across the state, safety net hospitals that serve communities are going to remain open to serve the needs of the most needy people that we represent. And now we have before us, for the first time in a long time, an honest, disciplined budget that doesn't contain tricks or gimmicks, except for the few that I just talked about that were added tonight. And so we may not be completely satisfied with the final product. I am not, because while the budget is honest and disciplined and certainly free of gimmicks, to the extent that I could control it at least, it is still not a pretty document. For the first time in a generation, state general fund support for K-12 education will be reduced from what we invested in K-12 education last year. Nobody should ever be proud of that. This will limit our ability to reward teachers for educating the leaders of tomorrow. It is not the way that we should do our business if we are truly investing in Louisiana's future. TOPS. TOPS will be funded at approximately 70%. Now, I very much wanted to fully fund TOPS, and I offered a plan to do just that. Unfortunately, too many members of the legislature would not join me in making sure we could fully fund TOPS. Let's also not forget, as I mentioned earlier, we received news last week from our economists that the current fiscal year has a revenue shortfall that likely will hit $200 million and be carried into next year. And that means if it does happen, we will have to use revenue to address that shortfall first. In preparation for that, next week when the fiscal year starts and we hand the budget authority to the agencies across the state of Louisiana, at my direction, Jay Darden, the Commissioner of Administration, will direct them to take certain precautions to make sure that we have general fund on hand to meet that shortfall. The days of kicking the can down the road and pretending we don't have problems or somehow they will magically disappear are over. So we're no way out of the woods, and we have some difficult choices to make very soon, but I know that we're going to come out of this stronger than ever. I remain entirely optimistic about our state, about our future. Our best days are ahead of us. What we just finished was really the first half of what is going to be a 2-year process to pull our state out of the mess that was left to us by the previous administration. So we're going into halftime with a lot of successes. And I feel very good about where we are considering where we were just a few months ago. But I will not pretend we are where we need to be. We're a long way from reaching our goals. And in fact, I would tell you that the actions, the decisions that we're going to have to make in the future will be more difficult when we undertake comprehensive structural long-term tax reform next April. Those decisions are going to be more difficult than any the legislatures had to deal with to now. And in fact, I'm willing to wager you right now that many of the proposals that will be before the legislature next year will be the ones they rejected this year. And we will have visited a year's worth of pain on a lot of people for no good reason, because we could have gotten that down payment on tax reform this year and started realizing the benefits of it this year. And finally, to the people of Louisiana, the great people of Louisiana who've watched us closely over the first 6 months. I have tried and will continue to try to be as open and honest with all of you about the challenges before us and transparent in the solutions that I propose, and I will work every single day to get with people all across the state, all the stakeholders, whether they're business and industry, higher education, the faith-based community, everyone across this state, so that I can listen to your ideas, so that together we can find common ground and move forward. And that will not change. Our work was not easy, and while we may have come up short in a few ways, we made difficult choices and we made tremendous progress. We have stabilized this state in a manner that is honest and transparent. We avoided the catastrophic cuts that were imminent had we failed to take bold and decisive action. But we start next year with more than $300 million in cuts that will be painful. But I want to finish on a high note. I am extremely pleased with where we are, considering where we started. And I could not be more excited about the future of our great state than I am right now, because I have seen a lot of good work by good, competent, diligent people in the legislature, but also all across the state of Louisiana, pulling this state forward. And I know that that's going to continue. And so with that, I would be happy to take your questions. Well, let me change that. I'm going to take your questions. So,
Are you going to veto the preamble language that front loads TOPS that says that you have to divvy the money up by thirds?
well, Sue, as you heard me say, I certainly have problems with the language that was put into the supplemental appropriations bill. We are studying that language. I'm not going to announce whether I'm going to veto it or not here tonight. Yes, sir.
From KTBS in Shreveport, a lot of folks in our area seem to have some real misgivings about this funding for the medical school.
Yeah, we are convinced that we have a way to fund the medical school in Shreveport. Also, the medical school in New Orleans needed some money, but the most acute need was in Shreveport. I absolutely concede that. But we have a funding mechanism where we believe by redirecting some dollars that have already been coming from our private partner hospitals, but they were going to LSU, instead by sending those to DHH, because they are associated with the collection of data and with research, that we are able to take those dollars and get a match from the federal government that is allowable by CMS and return even more dollars to Shreveport and to New Orleans. And so we believe ultimately we are going to be better off, because rather than simply trying to find a one-time fix with an infusion of state general fund, we have actually unlocked a mechanism that allows us to regularly fund those hospitals. And there are also many other things that we are exploring with the folks there at the medical school to change the way that they operate, so that they actually have recurring revenue at the hospital itself that prevents the need from having to come to the legislature every year for this additional appropriation. So we believe, and it's going to be very obvious in just a very short period of time, that the medical school in Shreveport will be on a much sounder financial footing than they have been. I do not have a concern here tonight about the medical school in Shreveport. I have been committed to it as governor, as candidate. We are going to make sure that that medical school is strong, in fact, stronger than ever. Yes?
Governor, you were unable to get the 6 votes you needed to pass the Melinda White bill. Traditionally, governors would be able to get those sorts of 6 votes. And in the end, you got less than half of the money that you were originally trying to get for the special session.
Yeah.
Explain to us why you're not a political loser from the final result.
Well, first of all, I'm not a political loser because I'm the governor of the great state of Louisiana. Secondly, I guess you slept through the first part of my presentation tonight. We inherited a $2 billion deficit. We've raised 3/4 of the revenue necessary to close that deficit. We are, by accessing our federal dollars, I'm going to bring $200 million home. Save right at $200 million of state general fund by bringing our federal tax dollars home through the Medicaid expansion, and we are going to execute about $300 million in cuts for next year. I'll take that any day, Tyler. You can associate it with losing. It's a good win. Yes? Yeah.
Okay, sorry it's late. Now that we're at this point, would you have done anything differently with the speaker's race? And do you think if you had won that battle that we would be sitting here in a different position?
How is that helpful? We are where we are. I don't get do-overs any more than you do. I'm committed to working with the legislature as they are, and the leadership as it happens to be configured at this time, and we're going to continue to do great things for the state of Louisiana. Yes, anything? I know it's late. Yes, sir.
I know you don't want to think about this.
Well, then don't ask me.
There's been whispers of maybe a third special session. What do you think the chances of that possibly happening?
Well, right now, I don't offer an opinion on it. I don't see on the horizon right now any eventuality that would require us to have a third special session. But obviously, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know. I don't anticipate going back into session before April of next year. If that changes, we will issue a call, and you will know when it starts and what will be dealt with. But I really just don't see that happening right now.
Last question. Governor, do you have, I've got it covered. Governor, do you have any indication, any hope that this legislature, who could not pass even the smallest long-term
Yeah.
modifications, will be able to do a comprehensive tax reform plan when they can't get an agreement on the
Well,
little stuff?
Well, I know that there are many members who are going to have to be more courageous than they were this time. But yes, I do have hope. I'm always hopeful and optimistic that we'll rise to our challenges, and that's the next challenge before us. And so we will be committed to that, and we are going to pursue it between now and the end of the session that starts next April to make sure that we're successful. Failure simply is not an option. And now, Melinda, you had your hand up before Sue asked me the question. And so I know that we said the last question, but the last question will go to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask how much you think the deteriorating relationships between the House and the Senate made it more difficult to reach a budget compromise. It seems as though every time somebody talks about relationships improving, there are no indications that that is the case. Does that make it more complicated to get anything worked out?
Well, look, I think you know by asking the question, it's not helpful to have senators on the floor talking about being bullied or being jammed by the House, and then the House sending leaders to the floor to say, no, it's the other way around, and we've done our business and you haven't. It just shouldn't happen that way. And I think with better leadership, better communication, it wouldn't happen that way. And unfortunately, that does make it harder for all of us to get our work done, not just me as governor, but the House and the Senate. But, you know, this was a learning experience for everyone, certainly myself included, in my administration, but I also think for the new leaders in the House and the Senate. And I have every reason to believe, and certainly to hope, that going forward, you're going to see better leadership, better communication, better teamwork, because at the end of the day, we all serve the people of Louisiana. And we don't serve them as well as we could if we're failing to communicate and work together to find our way forward and to tackle the challenges before us. So with that, I want to wish everyone a good night. Be very careful going home. And thank you. Good morning, good night, whatever it is.